Languages divided. Long ago, when the earth was still young in its stories, people lived together in one great place. They all spoke one language. Their voices rose softly, weaving words that others could easily understand. This made it simple for them to share their thoughts, to plan together, and to build their lives side by side. In those days, people journeyed east, moving through wide fields and gentle hills. They found a plain in the land of Shinar. It was a quiet, open space, where the earth was soft and the skies stretched wide above them. Here they decided to settle down. Together they looked at the world, dreaming of what they could create. Because their voices were all in harmony, they thought, let us make a name for ourselves. Let us build a city and a tall tower reaching into the heavens, so high that it touches the sky. Their words were filled with hope, and their hands began to work, gathering bricks and tar to shape their dream. The tower was a wonder to behold. Day by day, brick by brick, it grew taller and stronger. People came and went around it, speaking the same gentle language, working as one. Their laughter and chatter blended softly like a gentle stream. But far above, in the vast and quiet heavens, a thought stirred. How strange it was that all people spoke alike and shared one voice, a voice so full of purpose and strength. This made their work together swift and their plans wide-reaching. Yet there was a quiet care about balance, about the turning of the world. So a decision was made, not with harshness or anger, but with a gentle changing of the tide. Suddenly the gentle speech that filled the air began to shift. Words that once made sense now sounded strange. Voices, so familiar and clear, wove new sounds and rhythms. Little by little, the language of one became many languages. It wasn't a great thunder or a storm, only a soft ripple that changed the way people spoke. A word that meant peace could now mean something else. A sentence that invited kindness was now heard in a different melody. People listened closely, trying to understand one another, but the sounds, fuller and deeper, grew strange and new. The builders found it harder to work together. Each spoke in a tongue that others could not quite follow. They smiled gently, trying to guess the meaning behind new words, but the smooth thread of their one language was now a tapestry of many. Slowly the people stopped building the tall tower. Their dream paused in the dust and bricks. The city around it was still, save for whispers carried by different winds. Faces once joined in laughter now turned softly to their families and friends who spoke their own way. In time they quieted their voices and began to move apart. From this place of many voices, they journeyed to lands far and wide. Each group carried its own language, like a soft folded cloth, carefully wrapped and carried with gentle hands. Where they went, their languages sang quietly, but quite differently, coloring the earth with new sounds and stories. Yet they remembered the plain of Shinar, a place where all voices once rose like one breath, in hope and in dream. This story, told in the gentle hush of time, reminds us, though words may change and spread like seeds upon the wind, the heart behind them beats slowly, calmly, longing to understand and to be understood. And now, as night begins to fall softly over all the lands, we rest in the quiet knowing that every whispered word, every gentle voice, is part of a great unfolding story, still being told. The silence that now settled over the plain was complete and still, yet not empty. It sang softly with the memory of footsteps that once echoed through its dust, with the quiet laughter of children playing among the scattered stones of a half-finished tower. The stones, now weathered and moss-covered, held the weight of countless hands that had placed them with hope and care. And though the voices changed, the people's hearts remained knit to one another. For even as languages spread like seeds carried on the wind, the eagerness to reach out, to be heard and to listen, lived on. In distant fields and cities, near bubbling streams, beneath endless skies, every voice told a story. Sometimes those stories tangled like vines, their meanings twisting into riddles. At other times, like birds on the wing, the words soared with clarity, finding new ears to embrace. From the separation of speech grew new melodies, songs crafted from fresh phrases whispered through the leaves. Songs that told of the sun rising over hills never seen before, of rivers vast and wide, and of the starry nights that draped the world in silence, but for the soft hum of life. Each group, traveling across deserts and mountains, over seas and plains, wove their language into the fabric of daily living. Words became the colors painted in a child's drawing, the warmth and greetings shared by neighbors, the comfort in a mother's lullaby. They carried the essence of their ancestors' dream of reaching for the skies and building something enduring, even if the shape of that dream had shifted. And somewhere under vast skies that united all corners of the earth, there stirred a gentle hope. It whispered like a breeze through wheat fields that perhaps one day the threads of many tongues could weave a new harmony, one where differences were not walls, but bridges spanning the spaces between souls. Even now, under the starry canopy, if one listens closely, the earth murmurs the story of Shinar. It sings through the rustling grass, breathes in the scent of rain on warm soil, and hums in the quiet rhythm of the night. Though languages divide people outwardly, deep within, the desire to understand and be understood remains a quiet, steadfast song. It is a song older than words, older than towers, a song born with the dawn of humankind, the yearning to connect, to share, to belong. The winds carry this song onward, from generation to generation, from place to place, and with each telling, it gathers strength. The story of the tower in Shinar is not just a tale of division. It is a story of endless beginnings, of how people, though separated by language, continue to build, to dream, to listen, to speak. And so, as night gently folds around the world, the tale moves quietly forward, carried in every whisper, every greeting, every voice that reaches out, searching eagerly for another. Because in every word spoken, in every story shared, the spirit of that ancient dream lives on. A forever unfolding tale that speaks in many tongues, but sings one song. The song of humanity, the song of connection, the song that will never end. The gentle hum of dawn broke over the lands where the voices had first divided. It was as if the earth itself breathed alongside the people, stirring memories of a time when all words were one. The morning light sifted softly through leaves and over hills, carrying with it an echo, faint, nearly forgotten, but persistent, of those united utterances spoken long ago. Even as languages flourished apart, they shared a rhythm, a pulse that traced back to that single, original song. Each tongue, in its unique cadence and pitch, held a tie to the others. The differences were the branches of the same tree, diverging outward but rooted in the same soil of hope and yearning. Across the world, elders whispered stories beside hearts, weaving lessons of patience and kindness into the fabric of their words. Children echoed these sounds with innocent curiosity, playing with syllables and syllabic dances that delighted the ear. Language, though varied, was everywhere tender, a soft gesture, a gentle touch, a bridge reaching from heart to heart. In quiet moments between bustling days, the people would pause to listen, to the rustle of grasses, the murmur of rivers, the distant call of birds. Nature's voice was a silent companion to human speech, its subtle sounds blending with human melodies in a timeless duet. This natural chorus reminded all that beneath divided languages flowed a continuous stream, an unbroken thread connecting all creatures and all lands. Even the stones beneath their feet seemed to hum with this ancient resonance, bearing silent witness to countless voices raised in dreams and declarations of belonging. Some stones bore carvings, marks of meaning deeply etched by hands who longed to capture the truths of life in symbols beyond speech. These symbols carried their own language, a universal script of shapes and shadows, teaching that communication transcended mere spoken sound. As seasons turned and generations passed, new voices emerged, voices shaped not only by the earth and air but also by the minds of those who yearned to explore and create. In the spaces between towns and cities, travelers shared their diverse melodies, discovering fragments of each other's stories. Words migrated like gentle birds, nesting sometimes in foreign lands, learning new tunes to hum along in unfamiliar skies. Markets buzzed with exchanges rich not just in goods, but in laughter, advice, and song. Though the sounds might be foreign at first, the intent, the yearning to connect was clear. Buyers and sellers, strangers only moments before, found common ground in shared nods and gleams in the eye, proving that understanding often blooms first from openness rather than perfect speech. There were moments, however, when the unfamiliar could feel like a wall, a quiet barrier built of hesitation and fear. Yet even then the heartbeat of the ancient dream remained steady. Beneath that wall lay a seed waiting to grow, nourished by kindness and patience. It is in those times that silence took on a new meaning, not as a void but as a space where listening begins. Small acts of compassion wove invisible threads across cultures. A guiding hand offered in a crowded street, a smile received in return, a shared meal breaking bread in diverse tongues. All these became gentle gestures scripting a new narrative. The human spirit, persistent and tender, reaches always for connection, even when the words are tangled or unknown. In gardens tended by many hands speaking many languages, flowers blossomed as universal pilgrims of color and scent. They spoke no words but conveyed messages of peace and beauty, invitations to rest and reflect. Here language was found again in the softness of petals, the dance of sunlight through leaves, the flowing song of water over stones. And so it was that the divided voices of Shinar's descendants did not fall silent, but thrived in their variations, each a melody distinct, yet belonging to a greater harmony. Through this the ancient dream expanded, not striving solely toward the heavens in stone and mortar, but reaching inward toward understanding and outward toward a shared life. Within cities born from countless tongues, poets and artists took upon themselves the sacred task of weaving words into tapestries of meaning. Their creations breathed life into the spaces between languages, painting pictures with phrases, shaping emotions from syllables. These were not just words, but invitations, doorways to feeling and insight beyond geography and dialect. Musicians from different corners would gather under open skies, letting their instruments mingle in unspoken dialogue. Drums, flutes, and strings conversed with the wind, carrying stories from one group to another. Their music became a universal language, a place where divisions softened and joy spoke louder than any barrier. In this mingling, languages did not merely survive, they enriched one another. They borrowed words and sounds, creating new expressions that no single origin could contain. Through exchange and mixing, possibilities grew endless, as fluid and varied as the very air that carries voices on the breeze. Some sought to capture this beauty in written form, old and new scripts embracing each other to craft texts accessible to many. Libraries grew like gardens of words, inviting all peoples to gather knowledge and dreams alike. There, the words of Shinar's first days were told and retold, reminding readers of their shared beginnings and collective futures. Individuals found within themselves the ancient yearning to understand and be understood. They recognized that beneath language lies a deeper communication, a language spoken with eyes, hands, and hearts. It is a language of presence, of empathy, a mutual gaze that reflects the soul's silent song. Thus, even in moments of solitude, no one was truly alone. The echoes of countless voices encircled each person, a gentle hum reminding them of a larger story, one written not only in words, but in spaces between words, in the pauses that lend weight and meaning. And in these spaces, hope quietly blossomed. Hope that someday, in some way yet to be born, the many languages might not only coexist, but intertwine perfectly, voices joining in a single chorus that honors difference while embracing unity. For the dream of Shinar was never truly lost. It lives in every syllable spoken softly to a child, in every greeting exchanged across borders, in every story passed down through time. It is the breath woven through the fabric of human speech, the pulse beneath disparate tongues. The earth murmurs still, inviting all who will listen to hear this enduring song. It is not a tale of division alone, but of connection, fragile, persistent, endlessly renewed. Here in the quiet moments between words, we find the true language of humanity, a song without end, sung in many voices yet heard as one. Amidst the intricate tapestry of Shinar's evolving narrative, the threads of language wove ever more subtly. It was not only in the spoken word or the swelling chords of music that understanding took form, but in the quiet, unassuming exchanges that often escape notice. A glance held a promise, a gesture conveyed comfort, and a shared silence spoke of unity. In markets bustling with the hum of commerce, vendors and patrons negotiated not only with tongues, but with smiles, nods, and the language of offerings. A fruit handed from one hand to another, an exchanged basket of fragrant spices, such were acts upon which trust was built. The unspoken flourished alongside the known, and this delicate balance gave rise to a newfound appreciation for the nuances that defied precise translation. At night, when the clamor settled and moonlight draped the city in gentle silver, the people of Shinar gathered in small circles. Here stories unfurled without urgency, each tale a thread connecting past to present, bridging familiar and foreign alike. The cadence of narration, the rhythm of breath, and the subtle inflections of the storyteller's voice became as vital as the narrative itself. In these moments, Language was less a barrier and more a dance, a shared experience in which the heart found resonance beyond syntax. Amid this harmonious exchange, the elders spoke softly of the early days, when languages once divided rather than united. They recalled the confusion and the isolation, yet also the resilience that grew from being cast apart. Their memories were not dwelled upon with regret, but honored as the foundation from which this present harmony blossomed. It was understood that the diversity of tongues should not be eroded in the pursuit of unity. Rather, each language was a delicate bloom in a vast garden, each with its unique fragrance and color. To lose one was to lose a piece of collective identity. Thus, the people of Shinar cultivated an environment where learning a new language was an act of curiosity and respect. Children, with their boundless openness, became natural polyglots. They sang songs in multiple dialects, their laughter echoing through the alleys, weaving disparate sounds into a symphony of youthful joy. Educators nurtured this multiplicity, teaching scripts and oral traditions side by side. In classrooms bathed in natural light, words blossomed in vibrant hues as students painted meanings and feelings alongside them. Technology, too, adapted to this principle. Devices designed to translate languages evolved beyond mere mechanical transcriptions. They became companions that suggested not only words but cultural contexts, promoting deeper empathy. The cold mechanical voice softened, mimicking the tender cadences of human speech, reminding users that even across invisible lines of code, understanding was possible. Amid the rush of daily life, moments of deliberate stillness held great power. Meditation gardens, sanctuaries of calm, invited visitors to listen, not just to the external sounds, but to the whispers within. In these spaces, the boundaries between languages thinned further, and hearts found a universal rhythm. This inner harmony spilled outward, coloring interactions with patience and kindness. A festival emerged, known as the Festival of Echoes. Held as twilight caressed the skies, it gathered people from every corner of Shinar. Here language was celebrated in all its forms, spoken, sung, danced, signed, and painted. Lanterns carved with words from myriad alphabets floated upward, their glow illuminating the faces of gathered friends and strangers alike. At the heart of the festival, poets recited verses that wove multiple languages into single stanzas, challenging listeners to feel the meaning beyond words. Musicians improvised melodies, merging instruments from diverse cultures, creating harmonies that transcended any particular tradition. Dancers moved fluidly, their gestures a universal syntax of movement. The festival became a living testament to the richness of plural voices blending into one chorus. In quieter quarters, families gathered around hearths, sharing meals seasoned with stories. Recipes carried linguistic heritage as much as flavor, each dish a memory shaped by tongue and tradition. Conversations flowed, peppered with expressions unique to each culture, yet existing within a mutual understanding enriched by time and patience. Small villages at the edges of Shinar maintained ancient languages whispered by elders. Visitors came to learn, to listen, to witness these linguistic treasures sustained in the embrace of nature. Here, language intertwined with environment, a word for a river's song, another for the dance of leaves in the wind. Each was a piece of the world's vast mosaic, valued and preserved. Through all these moments, the principle remained clear. Language was alive, breathing and shifting with the people who spoke it. It was neither static scripture nor rigid rule, but a living river, flowing freely, gathering scattered streams into a profound current. As the years unfolded, the children who once bridged divides grew into adults who led communities with grace. They carried the legacy of coexistence with humility, aware that language was a sacred trust. Their leadership was gentle, rooted in listening and in honoring the stories of every voice. Libraries continued to serve as sanctuaries of the mind and spirit. Their collections expanded, embracing multimedia, charts, sounds, images, all preserved in caring archives. Within these halls of knowledge, the past reached out to the present, reminding all who entered that each story held a key to understanding and connection. At times, challenges arose. Misunderstandings and miscommunications reminded the people of Shinar that the journey toward harmony required ongoing effort. Yet these moments were met with patience, a willingness to pause, clarify, and tenderly repair the threads of dialogue. Conflict became a teacher rather than a divider. In this enduring dance of words and silences, people discovered the profound truth that language is less about perfection in speech and more about sincerity of intent. A kind phrase spoken haltingly carried more warmth than flawless diction uttered without heart. Conversations marked by vulnerability and openness built bridges stronger than any grammatical rule. The very nature of communication expanded to encompass not only what was said, but what was understood. Empathy became the unseen thread stitching together the fabric of interaction. In this space between words, there blossomed a shared humanity that spoke louder than any single tongue. As sunlight filtered softly through the leaves of ancient trees, the people of Shinar moved forward, hopeful and aware. They cherished the legacy of languages divided and languages united, knowing that true harmony was not uniformity, but a mosaic of voices held together in kindness. And so the story continued, not as a completed tale, but as a living journey. Each day brought new words, new sounds, and new melodies, woven with care into the vibrant chorus of life. The dream of Shinar endured, a testament to the quiet power of connection, the subtle art of listening, and the gentle courage to speak. In this ongoing symphony, every voice mattered. Every language was a gift. And in the spaces between the words, the deepest truths whispered, waiting to be heard anew. This gentle celebration of voices, words, and silences became a living mosaic, vibrant and breathing in the heart of each person. The festival was no longer just an event marked on calendars, but a rhythm that moved softly through daily lives, carried not on the wind alone, but in every hand extended, every eye meeting another's gaze, every breath given space for understanding. In quiet corners of the community, elders sat with children, their conversations weaving threads of old and new. These dialogues, tender as dawn, wove stories that seemed at times to drift beyond language itself. They became shared moments of presence, where the need for flawless grammar or perfect vocabulary melted away. What mattered most was the bridge built in the space between speaking and listening, that sacred middle ground where meaning lived and grew. It was in this space, too, that disagreements found space to settle, rather than the sharp edge of frustration or the cold silence of avoidance. Words were welcomed gently, like leaves falling on a still pond, causing ripples but never storms. Here the community learned patience was not passivity, but a deep, active listening that allowed for the fullness of expression, even when speech faltered or voices trembled. This patience ripened into something more profound, an understanding that language is not merely a tool for exchange, but a compass pointing to the essence of who we are. Each accent, each dialect, each hesitation carried the weight of histories, hopes, and the invisible threads of shared humanity. It was in these subtleties that the festival's true magic lived. Hand in hand with this discovery came the realization that silence, too, had a language. In moments when words were scarce, when hesitations lingered like soft shadows, silence spoke volumes. It was the breath taken before a story, the pause for empathy to deepen, the space where hearts listened with undivided attention. As the festival's glow extended into everyday life, a gentle transformation swept through schools. They became gardens where multiple languages blossomed side by side. Teachers nurtured not just vocabulary and grammar, but cultural curiosity and respect. Children learned to speak in many tongues, yes, but more importantly, they learned to hear with humility. Classrooms became safe havens where mistakes were steps forward, and confusion an invitation to explore deeper. With technology bridging distances, stories traveled on digital wings, connecting faces and voices strewn across continents. Virtual firesides flickered with tales told in diverse tongues, inviting listeners to rest a while in the warmth of shared narratives. Through screens, people seen only through pixels became neighbors, kin in a vast garden of languages. Journeys continued beyond words. Festivals invited artists who interpreted language through vibrant colors, sculpted forms, and even scents and flavors. Paintings pulsed with the rhythm of spoken verse without a single letter inscribed. Sculptures caught the curve of a phrase, the rise and fall of a sentiment, frozen mid-breath in stone and metal. Culinary wonders told stories seasoned with memory, simmered with tradition, presented as an edible poem. Meanwhile, in the heart of the village, the ancient nature-inspired languages held on with quiet grace. Their speakers nurtured a sacred trust, knowing that by preserving these tongues they safeguarded entire worlds of relationships. To land, to sky, to water, and to the creatures that lived alongside. Visitors came not to conquer or consume, but to listen with humble hearts, mapping these languages like constellations in the wide night sky of human expression. Young leaders emerged, their voices embodying the festival's lessons. They moved beyond titles and power, carrying the wisdom of humility like a lantern lit from within. They saw leadership as the art of facilitating many stories and songs, never silencing a whisper, nor overshadowing a chorus. Their guidance was quiet, steady, allowing diverse voices to shape a direction that belonged to all. Libraries evolved into sanctuaries where past and present converged. The crackle of old pages mixed with soft digital hums. Audiobooks drifted alongside scrolls and manuscripts. In these spaces, people wandered as if in forests of thought and memory, delighting in the textures of knowledge preserved across lifetimes. Here, every visitor found a thread to pull, unraveling narratives that connected their own stories to the great tapestry, stretching behind and beyond them. But life, with its inevitable complexities, also brought moments when communication faltered. When words tangled or intentions were misread, frustration sometimes shadowed understanding. Yet even then, the community reached for tools born of compassion, the patience to pause, the courage to clarify, and the grace to forgive. These moments became opportunities to mend, to listen all the more deeply. Through sincere intent, misunderstandings transformed into bridges rather than walls. Empathy grew as an unspoken contract, binding all who shared in the festival's spirit. It was a kind of listening that sought not only to hear, but to feel the edges of another's experience. In this gentle attention, language expanded beyond signs and sounds to embrace the unspoken currents of emotion and meaning that pulse beneath every exchange. Within this mosaic of voices, there was room for every story, those small and grand, delicate and bold, each word spoken with kindness, each silence held with respect, layered together like tiles in an ever-expanding mosaic of belonging. It was a pattern painted not with colors alone, but with the luminous light of connection. Here, harmony did not mean sameness, but the beauty of difference woven tightly with care. And so the festival's song became the song of everyday life, softly spoken, patiently heard, courageously shared. In cafes, at doorsteps, and bustling markets, the tender dance of language continued, inviting all to join. With the passing seasons, the community thrived, not despite its diversity, but because of it. The confident unfolding of many languages side by side cultivated not confusion, but clarity born of respect. The willingness to listen with open hearts taught that words could heal, unite, and inspire. As twilight settled on the festival's latest evening, lanterns glowed once more. They flickered in the gentle breeze, 1,000 small flames reflecting the ongoing journey of the communities who treasured their languages, not as relics to be guarded, but as living, breathing gifts to be shared. In this light, every person became a storyteller, a listener, a keeper of the fragile, radiant thread that linked the many voices into one enduring song of belonging. And with a quiet exhale, the story turned gently toward its pause, knowing that, like language itself, it would never truly end, only continue to evolve, blossom, and connect. One word, one silence, one shared moment at a time. As dawn's light bathed the festival grounds in a gentle gold, the warmth seeped into the quiet spaces between voices. Among the scattered lanterns, a new day beckoned, a new chapter where the rhythms of waking hearts blended seamlessly with the whispers of old tongues. There was a softness to the morning, as if the earth itself breathed in unison with the gathering. Children clung to elders' hands, their eyes wide with wonder, absorbing the mosaic of languages flowing like rivers through the crowd. Each syllable, whether crisp or drawn, warm or lilting, wove itself into the vast tapestry stretching beyond visible horizons. This day would hold no grand speeches. It was a day for gentle listening, for the humble surrender to stories that carried the weight of soils and skies. The culinary hearths, still glowing faintly from the night's rituals, beckoned with new offerings, recipes handed down in voices too fragile for hurried speech, crafted with care and reverence. The young leaders, stepping quietly among circles of shared meals, wore looks of serene attentiveness. Their leadership had shed the burdens of command and instead embraced a dance of presence. They acted as bridges, not barriers, guiding currents of curiosity without altering the natural flow. A soft murmur rose as an elder began to recount a tale born from the language of the river stones. Her voice, textured and slow, invited listeners into a world where water spoke in ripples and silence sang between each splash. Time seemed to pause, a deliberate reverence given to each phrase, as though it held the very pulse of the earth. Listeners leaned in, their breaths measured to catch every nuance. From across the square, a cluster of speakers shared a lullaby in an ancient bird language, the tone dipping and soaring like the wings that inspired it. The melody wrapped tenderly around the crowd, threading through hearts with familiarity and astonishment mingled. It was a language not just heard, but felt, soft as feathers, deep as hidden nests. Between stories, silence found its own voice, not empty, but full, the kind that fills spaces with respect rather than void. It was a pause pregnant with understanding, where no one rushed to fill gaps, but allowed meaning to emerge naturally like the slow unfolding of a flower. In one quiet corner, a group gathered around a digital manuscript, its pages alive with scrolls of hand-painted symbols and photographs glimmering with memory. Fingers traced the vibrant patterns over glass, connecting past with present, while elders and youth exchanged glances rich with shared wonder. This hybrid sanctuary embodied the festival's heart, the sacred interweaving of ancient roots and new growth. Language flitted gently from one hand to another, not as possession, but as gift. Words were painted in gestures, echoed in smiles, carried in glances heavy with unspoken gratitude, becoming a living dance where intention mattered more than form. A child, holding a small lantern shaped like a phoenix, approached her grandmother. The glow caught the corners of her eyes as she whispered a phrase learned only moments ago, an offering of humility and connection. The elder's face softened, a quiet embrace exchanged in silence richer than any chorus. As midday unfolded, the communal tables blossomed with dishes inspired by stories just told, flavors mingling like voices, textures layered like verses. It wasn't about replication but interpretation. Each recipe was a story retold with a new accent, a fresh breath. Sharing these meals became itself a language, a ritual of giving and receiving beyond spoken word. Around the edges, misunderstandings surfaced gently like hidden currents. A phrase misheard, a gesture misread. Moments that might have fractured lesser gatherings instead sparked gentle corrections and forgiving smiles. There was no rush to judgment, only a steady commitment to clarity born of patience. Each misstep was a thread woven into the larger narrative, enriching rather than diminishing the whole. In a sudden quiet moment, a circle formed around a shared fire, not for spectacle but for solace. Here voices dropped to whispers, and narratives turned inward, stories of loss, longing, hope. The firelight danced on faces weathered and young, illuminating the common threads that tied diverse paths into a single human journey. The festival's spirit had moved beyond celebration into communion. It had become a living practice, breathing in the giving and receiving of language, in silences that held weight, in the humility to listen deeply. The lanterns reflected quietly in eyes, symbols of an ongoing voyage that would never truly end. As twilight approached, the community gathered once again beneath the open sky. Lanterns lifted slowly, releasing soft glows that drifted into the night, a floating constellation etched by human hands and hearts. Each light carried stories and memories, hopes and remembrances, flickering with the promise of continual renewal. The sky itself seemed to lean closer, embracing the myriad languages like branches of an ancient tree reaching out. Stars twinkled in shared rhythm, a celestial chorus beneath which the festival thrummed quietly. The mosaic of voices was no longer fragmented but an evolving symphony, authentic, humble, alive. In the delicate hours before sleep, when conversation fades and only breath remains, the festival's lessons settled into the soul's quiet corners. Language was no longer simply a tool or measure, but a sacred thread weaving all life into one fragile, shining fabric. And so, the days would come and go, each bearing new stories, new challenges, new songs, but the essence would remain unchanged, an enduring commitment to respect, empathy, and the tender art of listening. In this, the community found not just survival, but blossoming, a shared journey carried forward by countless voices, bound by the gentle power of words and silence intertwined. The lanterns, still glowing softly in memory, whispered of tomorrow and all tomorrows after. They carried the light of ancient tongues and new voices alike, a beacon ever burning for those who come to learn, to hold, and to share. In the quiet aftermath, the festival was more than an event. It was a living promise, a promise that languages divided by time and circumstance could find unity, not in sameness, but through the courage to hear beyond words. And in that promise lived the heart of every story ever told, every feast ever shared, every silence ever held. So as the last flickers of light faded into the retreating night, the community settled gently once more into their shared rhythms. The language of the land, the water, the sky, and the creatures endured, carried by hands and hearts bound in humility and grace. And with each new sunrise, the story continued, ever unfolding, ever listening, ever connecting. Morning dawned with gentle hues of rose and gold, each ray of light seeming to trace the soft edges of leaves and the quiet contours of sleeping homes. A delicate breeze whispered through the village, carrying with it the faint scent of dew and lingering embers from the night's fires. The lanterns, now dimmed and resting, seemed to hum faintly with the memory of the stories they had held aloft against the darkness. As the first light brushed the faces of the community, there was a stillness that was not empty, but full, an intimate stillness that spoke of rest, reflection, and renewal. A few figures stirred near the communal hearth, rekindling the gentle warmth of embers, preparing for the day's quiet gatherings. The fire, now just a cradling glow, was like a heartbeat under the shared memory of the festival. Gathering slowly, the community's movements were soft, deliberate. There were no rushes or sharp commands, only the rhythms of those who had listened deeply the night before, who had tended not only to stories, but to each other's souls. Some children with eyes still bright but heavy carried the folded remnants of the lanterns, their fingers tracing familiar shapes, as if by touch they could hold on to the feeling a little longer. At the center of the village, a simple table was arranged, draped in linen the color of mist. Upon it lay instruments, a bundle of thin reeds for flute making, a bowl of colored threads for weaving, and small scraps of paper, printed with faded lines of old poems and prayers. These were the tools for the morning's craft, a ritual of creation and preservation, carried out not with hurried hands, but with the care accorded to sacred whispers. An elder stepped forward, her hair silver with time, her eyes reflecting the lingering light of the stars. She motioned softly for a circle, inviting anyone who wished to share their reflections. No pressure, simply an open space held in the embrace of understanding. The words spoken here were sparse, layered with kindness and clarity, an echo from the promise of night, that stories are lived in the spaces between speech and silence, in the weaving of presence itself. One voice, barely above a breath, spoke of a dream that had come in the dark hours, a dream of rivers flowing backward, carrying leaves that turned into birds. She wondered aloud what it meant to listen to the language of water, and whether such listening was like tracing the curves of a word half remembered. Another voice replied, gentle as moss, sharing a memory of a grandmother's lullaby, where the melody did not belong to any single tongue, but to the heart's quiet pulse. The circle's words grew lighter, touching on themes of growth, the slow unfolding of understanding like a bud opening to the sun. Someone spoke of the daily gestures of humility, the way to look at another's face without judgment, the way to say, I do not know, or please help me understand. These small acts, unadorned and essential, became the new threads being woven through the community's shared fabric. Children murmured with curiosity, asking questions that were more songs than inquiries. How do we hold a moment? Can words be soft enough to cradle someone's sadness? Is it possible to speak without walls between us? Their questions carried no impatience or need for immediate answers, only the patient yearning that blooms from genuine wonder. In response, an older voice offered a metaphor, that language, like a river, shifts with each season. It can erode, it can nurture, but always it flows. To be truly fluent, then, is not only to know grammar or vocabulary, but to understand the river's journey, the stones it carries, the banks it shapes, the touches of light dancing across its surface. As the morning wore on, hands busied themselves with simple crafts, a weaving here, a song hummed quietly there, a soft tapping of wood-shaping tools. These activities felt like prayers spoken not in words, but in rhythms and textures. The children's laughter, gentle and unhurried, blended with the murmur of adults, creating a subtle symphony that seemed to fill the space between moments. Later, a few gathered beneath a sprawling tree whose branches reached like arms embracing the sky. A voice rose, weaving a new story, one born from the night's shared experiences. It spoke not of heroes or conquests, but of ordinary encounters, of glances that held kindness, of hands offered and accepted, of moments when silence was a bridge rather than a barrier. The story unfolded slowly, each sentence measured and deliberate, as though the teller were carefully pouring honey. Listeners leaned in, their breath quiet, their hearts open. The tale was a mosaic of voices, a reflection of the festival's tapestry, where no single thread was dominant, but all contributed to the whole. By midday, the sun cast warm light that dappled through the leaves, and the community prepared for a shared meal. Simple ingredients brought by many hands, grains, herbs, fruit, and bread, were laid out without ceremony but with attentive care. Eating was not hurried. It was a continuation of the day's practice, a communion that transcended spoken language. Around the table, conversations resumed with a gentle ease. Words were chosen with thoughtfulness, silences respected like sacred pauses. Stories recounted were small and intimate, a neighbor's garden thriving, a child's first word, a remembered kindness from a stranger. Each narrative was a pebble cast into the pool of shared experience, its ripples reaching quietly across the circle. As the afternoon waned, the community divided naturally into groups, drawn by mutual interests or shared moments from the festival. Some gathered again by the fire to create songs inspired by the night's lantern flight. Others took up crafting instruments, while a few quietly wandered the paths between homes, collecting flowers or meditating in solitude. Throughout these gentle separations, the undercurrent of connection remained strong, an invisible thread woven from the night's humility and the morning's attentive presence. Even in solitude, the sense of belonging was palpable, like the steady pulse beneath the earth's surface. In one corner of the village, a child and her grandmother sat side by side, shaping soft clay with their hands. Their fingers pressed and smoothed, forming vessels that seemed both fragile and eternal. Without speaking, they exchanged glances that held centuries of learning, the unspoken language of lineage and love. Nearby, a small group gathered around scraps of old writing. They traced faded characters with reverence, contemplating the way words can live and die, be lost and rediscovered. One voice whispered an ancient poem, its cadence gentle as a lullaby, stirring a quiet awe for the endurance of stories across time. As afternoon deepened towards evening, the lights softened into a tender amber, and the village moved with a peaceful rhythm toward closing the day. Hands tidied spaces, voices diminished to whispers, and hearts embraced the stillness approaching like a warm cloak. Before the final dusk slipped away, the community came together one last time around the hearth. This moment was neither a conclusion nor a proclamation, but a gentle acknowledgement of the journey shared. Words here were fewer, softer, expressions of gratitude, promises to continue weaving the tapestry of understanding, reminders that the festival's true gift was ongoing presence. One elder, her voice barely rising above the crackle of embers, spoke of language as a living flame, one that must be tended with care or it will falter. But when nurtured by humility, empathy, and courageous listening, it becomes a light that guides through darkness, connects disparate hearts, and reveals the unseen contours of our shared humanity. As night reclaimed the sky, the community lingered, their faces illuminated by the fire's glow. The quiet was a song itself, a resonance of lessons learned and hopes nurtured, a space held in trust between now and what is yet to come. The festival, once a series of moments, had become a living breath, an ongoing dance between voices and silence, between ancient tongues and new expressions. It was a promise held in the soft curves of a phoenix lantern, in the shared meal, in the stars that had witnessed their stories, and in the tender act of listening. With one last look toward the charred embers, the community dispersed gently into the night. The ancient tree stood sentinel, its branches heavy with countless whispered languages, its roots deep in the soil of humility. And beneath that tree, the stories continued to grow, not as rigid scripts, but as fluid rivers flowing between hearts, forever embracing the languages divided, yet united in the sacred harmony of their telling. The night deepened, shadows stretching their long fingers across the village, while the stars grew sharper in the clear sky. Beneath the ancient tree, a gentle breeze stirred, carrying the faintest whisper of leaves brushing against one another. The community, still gathered, seemed to breathe as one quiet rhythm, a slow pulse marking the passing hours. Some leaned against the rough bark where the festival began, their eyes reflecting firelight and distant galaxies. Others wrapped themselves in halls, their hands cupping warm cups of herbal tea. The soft clinking of pottery mingled with subdued voices, words spoken in a steady, deliberate cadence, as if each syllable mattered like a prayer. One young woman traced patterns in the dirt, fingers moving tenderly, as an older man beside her shared a story not loud but measured, a thread of memory woven with care. His voice, barely above a murmur, floated through the cool air, carrying histories that felt sacred and fragile at once. It was not urgency but reverence that held their attention, each listener cradling the tale as something living, a flame to be kept, not grasped. A circle formed near the edge of the gathering, where the musicians from earlier began softly humming the verse of the old poem. Their voices wavered and found harmony in the quiet, filling the space between seconds with something tender. The melody was a breath, steady and slow, a lullaby for the day's closing. Nearby, the child and grandmother from before sat nestled beneath a hanging lantern, the clay softened by damp hands, the child's small fingers learning the patience of creating, shaping, releasing. Neither needed to speak, their silence was dense with meaning. It was a wordless language of love and lineage, spoken in the gentle press of palms and the shared rhythm of shaping earth into form. Others wandered away singly or in pairs, stepping softly into the dark paths that winded through the village's sleeping heart. Some followed the moonlight filtering through leaves, others found nooks where the night wrapped them in stillness, a quiet meditation on the day's unfolding. The sounds of breathing and the faint rustle of night creatures filled these moments. No rush, no demand, just presence. An elder sat close by the hearth again, his gaze cast downward, lips moving slightly as if listening inwardly. He spoke softly, words shaped by years spent watching language grow and shift, like seeds scattered by wind. Language, he said, is not merely what we say, but how we listen. It lives in the spaces between spoken words, silence is held, and the breath before a story begins. His words settled like dew on those near, a tranquil understanding spreading in the stillness. The flame they spoke of was fragile, yet enduring. It was humility that kept it alive, a gentle steadiness that refused to consume or dominate. Empathy fed it, a knowing that every voice was a piece of a larger mosaic. From deep shadows near the communal fire pit, the storyteller rose slowly, his voice rising just enough to carry into a hushed, still sky. He told of mothers cradling newborns wrapped in dreams, of rivers crossing lands without boundaries, of dances shared under multitude moons. His tale was a weaving of images and emotions, a gentle reminder that though words differ, the currents beneath them are shared. A small group listened intently, reclining against the roots of the great tree. Some eyes glistened with tears, others smiled softly, the glow of understanding blooming quietly. Language, the story declared, is both shield and bridge, sometimes a wall, other times a hand extended. As the night wore onward, the fire dimmed and embers scattered heat like slow pulses. The community remained, embracing the stillness that came not as an end, but a necessary pause in the ongoing conversation of life. Conversations softened to sighs, musings turned inward, and the steady cadence of breaths deepened. In these hours, the festival's essence became clearer, not an event sealed in time, but a living presence flowing through days yet to come. It was a mosaic of voices, silences, and stories, held tenderly beneath the guardian branches of the tree, a symbol of roots that reach far beyond the surface. The youngest child drifted to sleep, his head resting against a parent's side, dreams shaped by lantern flights and whispered verse. The grandmother gently closed her eyes, hands still resting on a smooth ball of clay, warmth seeping slowly into the earth. The musicians' humming faded into the soft rustling of night winds, a lullaby woven by the breath of the village itself. Dawn was still distant, but the community felt it as an unspoken promise, a subtle unfolding on the edge of night's embrace. The language that divided and connected them was not fixed but fluid, a flame guarded carefully through mutual respect, attentive listening, and shared silence. As the fire dwindled to ashes, the gathering slowly dissolved into solitude with gentle footsteps and quiet farewells. Yet the threads held tight, woven through stories told, hands joined, songs offered. The ancient tree remained, steadfast and patient, sheltering all beneath its enduring canopy of connection. In the echoing stillness, a single whispered thought lingered, that the true language is not spoken alone, but found in the spaces where many hearts listen and meanings grow between them. And so, the festival lived on, not in grand moments or loud proclamations, but in the shared breath of countless small, quiet acts of presence, in the knowing that every word shaped a world, every silence a sanctuary, and every story a thread stitching them together, forever intertwined beneath the vastness of sky and tree. With that, the night held its breath once more, a gentle pause cradling the promise of dawn and the unfolding tale of connection, waiting patiently to be heard again. As the first gentle light of dawn stretched its fingers across the village, a subtle transformation took hold. The air grew warmer, touched by the soft caress of morning. The ancient tree at the heart of the gathering stood witness, its branches tracing slow arcs against the awakening sky. Leaves whispered in the faint breeze, sharing secrets only they could understand. Villagers stirred quietly, their senses tuning to the peaceful hum of daybreak. No haste disrupted this slow arrival of light. Rather, there was a shared intention to honor the lingering silence beneath the rising sun. Slowly, small groups began to mingle again, their conversations tentative, like first drops of water returning to a parched stream. It was in these gentle exchanges that the festival's deeper truth shimmered most clearly. Each voice, distinct yet blended in harmony, carried the sweetness of respect and curiosity. Words no longer sought to impose or separate, but to invite and explore. The language spoken this morning was soft, measured, balanced, a reflection of all that had been absorbed through the night's stillness. An old woman who had spent much of the night reading the hearth's dying embers now shared a quiet smile with a young boy beside her. Though they spoke different tongues, their eyes held an understanding deeper than any dictionary might contain. Their hands brushed in greeting, an unspoken vow to continue weaving connection beyond words. Nearby, a cluster of villagers leaned toward the storyteller from the night before, the one whose poetry had woven threads of unity through the air. Now, under daylight's clarity, new questions arose, asked gently, listened to with equal care. The tension of differences seemed to dissolve, replaced by a willingness to hold both the known and unknown in compassionate balance. Across the meadow, the village musicians began softly coaxing notes from their flutes and strings. Their melodies did not seek to dominate, but to blend with the breeze and birdsong, adding an oral layer to the unfolding day's quiet ceremony. The music was the language of feeling, beyond words yet intimately familiar. It invited all who heard to sit with openness and shared breath. Parents guided their children toward the soft earth beneath the ancient tree. There in the stillness, silent lessons unfolded. The younger ones traced shapes with their fingers in the soil, mimicking the patterns of whispering leaves. The elders watched, tracing the continued lineage of stories and silent understanding that passed through generations, rooted in that same earth and sky. Between these moments, a teacher from the village began gathering the scattered scraps of written language used in the festival. Symbols and scripts, once hoarded jealously, were now placed carefully together in a circle, each piece a fragment of the whole. The arrangement resembled a mosaic, diverse, incomplete alone, but beautiful and meaningful united. Across the circle, a youth who had struggled to articulate thoughts before now spoke with a newfound clarity. Their voice, steady and sure, was filled with gratitude not just for the words learned, but for the silences honored. This balance, they said lightly, was the soil in which understanding lives and blossoms. The elder by the hearth, now bathed in morning light, returned to the group. His eyes carried the depth of night and the promise of day. He began to recount, this time with a hopeful tone, the ways language could stretch, bend, and grow without breaking. It was a living thing, he said, nourished by humility, empathy, and the ever-present willingness to listen beyond the surface. As the villagers gathered once more beneath the tree, a quiet ceremony began. Without spoken direction, they knelt or sat, hands joined or touching a shoulder. The shared silence between these gestures was thick with meaning, a fabric woven not from sound, but from presence itself. Time slowed, and the boundaries between self and other softened into a gentle ebb. A soft wind stirred, lifting petals from nearby flowers. The petals floated down like fragments of language, fragile pieces that might fall apart if grasped too tightly, but that formed a shimmering carpet when allowed to gather freely. These petals, they seemed to whisper, belonged to all who shared in the language of the heart. At the edges of the village, watchers and wanderers arrived, drawn not by the festival's noise but by the stillness it fostered. They came not to speak, but to feel, not to judge, but to witness. Their presence, quiet and respectful, added another layer to the ongoing dialogue woven through the community's morning gentle flow. By midday, the sun warmed faces and ears alike. Shadows played beneath the tree's vast canopy, offering cool refuge. Conversation stirred again but gently, moving between laughter and thoughtful pauses. Each interaction held space for difference, without fearing it, like leaves brushing softly against one another in the wind. The storyteller stepped aside as a group of children began to share their own versions of the night's tale. Their voices, sometimes hesitant, sometimes bursting with joy, carried the essence of unity wrapped in wonder. Older listeners leaned in, eyes bright with recognition, seeing the tale's timeless heart reflected anew in youthful echoes. Every story told, every note sung, every silence kept had folded carefully into the village's collective memory. Language, once a barrier or a blade, was now a bridge built from innumerable humble bricks of kindness. The festival's meaning stretched beyond any single moment or place. It was the living act of connection itself. As afternoon stretched toward evening, the elder by the hearth invited all to gather once more. His voice, softened by the sun and the day's gentle rhythm, invited reflection, not on what had been said or done, but on what had been felt. The spaces between words, he reminded them, held the deepest truths. One by one, villagers closed their eyes and breathed in unison. The breath was a silent cadence, a language of its own that carried memories and hopes alike. The ancient tree watched over this communion, steady and patient, its leaves shimmering with the laughter of the sun. In this sacred stillness, something profound and quiet settled. The division's language once carved seemed to melt away into an embrace. Not because all was resolved, but because the willingness to dwell in shared vulnerability had opened a space no words alone could create. The festival would end as all things do, but its essence, the flow of voices and silences, the pause and the connection, would persist. It existed in the simple acts of listening without judgment, speaking without demand, and holding space for others to be seen and heard. As the golden light softened into early evening, the villagers began to disperse once again, not with finality, but with gentle continuation. Hands lingering in parting, eyes meeting with quiet promise, hearts open to the journey ahead. Language remained, not a fortress, but a garden inviting all to tend it with care. Under the watching stars, the village would rest once more. Dreams would weave themselves into the threads of human connection, and the tree, ancient and alive, would continue its timeless breath. The story of language, divided yet whole, fragile yet enduring, carried forward by each voice willing to listen, and each silence brave enough to be shared.